Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar, Stayntouch Product Enhancements, version 5.58, Comparison to Budget Report, Group Rooming List, CSV Import, and more, presented by Stayntouch Implementation Consultant, Julia Josephson. I'm your host, Erin Fisher, the content writer here at Stayntouch. Today's presentation will cover how you can get the most out of the Stayntouch PMS version 5.58 product release. In this webinar, we will explain how to generate the comparison to budget report, illustrate that the rounding dropdown displays when the value is entered for a based on rate, demonstrate that filters and search parameters remain applied when clicking into and back from accounts receivables, commissions, company and TA cards, accounts, and the reports inbox. We'll also show that totals and a reason filter have been added to the rooms out of order and out of service report, explain updates to the type email in subtag for Stayntouch Guest Kiosk, explain how to customize primary authentication for check-in via Stayntouch Guest Kiosk, illustrate the addition of the group rooming list CSV import, and finally, we'll show that the Proforma invoice sequence number was added to print and email versions of the individual and group Proforma invoice and activity log, and this is a French legal requirement. We will have a short Q&A session at the end of the presentation. Feel free to submit questions throughout the presentation, and we will answer them in the order they are received at the end. And that's all I have right now. Julia, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Great, thank you, Erin. Can you hear me and confirm you can see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm excited to show you these new features. The first one I'm going to show you is the final installment of our budgets functionality, which is a report where you can compare your actual revenue numbers to budget. So to run that, I go into Reports and New Report. And if you have the budget functionality turned on in the back end, this will be enabled by default. If you don't, you won't be able to see it. But here I've got comparison to budget, so I can select that, and then I can just run the report. And when I go to my report inbox, we can see it's running there. I can refresh. I can click into here, and it's going to show me my budget numbers compared to my market codes. You can see here that I did not select to filter this down by any specific market codes. So this is showing me all of my market codes. But you can also see here that I only have a budget in my budgets template for transient and for group. But you can see here that I have the number of nights and the total revenue and my ADR in my budget. And the budget column is on the right-hand side, the actual column is in the middle, and then the difference is showing me by default in percentage. But if I'd rather see the amount, I can come up here to the variance toggle, which is on percentage by default, and I can toggle it over to actual, which then changes those numbers from percentages to actual amounts that are varied to budget. So for this group example, we can see my budget was $900. My actual revenue is $2,100. So the difference is a positive $1,200, which is showing in green. If these numbers were, if any of these numbers were off, they would be in red, which you can actually see some of these down here in the transient line. For example, here I've got my nights. I had budgeted at 60 nights. The actual I've had is 54, and so the variance is that I'm behind budget by 6 room nights. Again, I can filter this report when I run it by market code if I don't want to see all of my market codes. I also have the ability to print it or just view it on the screen. And then I ran one earlier that was just for one day, so you can see that because I ran it by default for the current month. But if you run it here, it will show a daily summary. And if you run it for less than a 14-day period, you'll also see this daily summary piece rather than just viewing the whole month totals. The next feature is related to revenue management. If we go into our backend settings, into rates and we go to create a new rate code. This is related to when we're creating a based on rate and the rounding functionality. So you can see here in my new rate screen that I have the option to base my rate on another rate, and by default now I'm not seeing any rounding rules. Before, the rounding drop down always appeared here whether you were basing the rate on another or not. Now you have to put in a value to base the rate on for that to appear. And a value would be anything that is 0 or higher. If you leave it blank, that's considered not a value. So if I put in $0, then I get my rounding. If I had left that blank, the rounding goes away or doesn't appear by default. The next setting that was released in this feature release is related to our kiosk language translations. So if I come into my backend for kiosk and go into my language and go to edit, we have a new tag that's called type underscore email underscore in underscore sub. That's this one here. So by default, this will be blank for your property and nothing will appear there. However, if you'd like a subheading to appear underneath the header for type email in, where in this example it says enter your email, we could enter a subheading that could say something like, why you'll be able to receive a copy of your bill, check out online, order a late checkout, and more. So with this, you're just giving someone sort of a reason of why they should enter their email, and this could help if they were hesitant to in the first place. The next feature I'm excited to show you is something that was really heavily requested on our feature request forum. Now, filters and search parameters will remain applied when you're clicking into or back from accounts receivables, commissions, company travel agent cards, accounts, and the report inbox. So I'm going to show you some examples of all of those. For accounts receivables, if I come into my financials and go to accounts receivables, if I type in, for example, AM, you can see then I'm getting only accounts that have AM in the name. And if I click into one of them and do something in here and then go back out, you can see that now my filter where I'm showing only accounts receivable accounts with AM in the title, that those appear still filtered out to only show those. The next one is in commissions, which this is another hotel. For example, I've only got 3 payable travel agents here, but if, for example, I wanted to pull out ones that only had travel in the name, that pulled up these. Again, I can go into one of them, and when I go back out, well, it's thinking. Well, we will let it keep thinking and I'll move on not to waste your time. But I promise if we went back out to commissions that it would have just those 2 travel agents that had travel in the name shown there. Then the next section where the filters will still be applied is when you're in revenue management and company and travel agent cards. Again, here, if I search for AM, this is now only showing me company cards with AM in the title. And then if I click on one and go back out, that filter to show only AM is still applied. The next section where this is applicable is in accounts. So I've gone to front desk accounts, and here, for example, if I want to see accounts related to ABC News, that pulls, it's filtered out all of the ones that either don't have ABC News in the name or aren't associated with the ABC News company card. And if I go into one and then back out, you can see my filter for ABC News is still applied. And then lastly, the last place where this is applicable is in the reports inbox. So if I go to reports and report inbox, You can see I've got a bunch of different reports here, but maybe I just want to see the ones that have comp in the title because I'm looking for my comparison, my company, travel agent producers, etc. I can again click into these, and when I go back out, my filter will still be applied. The next feature we have is also report related, and it's that we've added a total and a reason filter to the out of order or out of service rooms report. So if I go to run a new report and I pull up the out of order, out of service report, you can see here that there's now a reason filter where I could unselect all, and then I could specifically highlight the reasons that I want to see and only see those on the report that I'm running. I'm going to run another one where I am seeing all. And then I still have the ability to print or download this report, but when I look at it, I now have totals at the top, which is total out of order rooms and total out of service rooms. If I print it or download it as a CSV, those totals will also appear. So for example, I just downloaded it as a CSV, and if I open it, you can see the total out of order rooms and total out of service rooms appear here as well. One thing that's important to note is that if you are running this for a long date range and the same room number appears multiple times on the throughout the date range as being out of order or out of service, it will only be counted once in the total rooms count. So if, for example, room 307 here was out of order for another date range, it would still count as only one of two rooms out of service because it's the same room number. All right, and then the next feature we have is again related to kiosk. So I'm going to go back into my settings. And we now have the ability to customize the primary authentication for check-in. This is not enabled by default, so you do have to request this feature to be toggled on. But if you have us toggle it on and you go into kiosk and check in, you will now see under primary authentication, there is now last name, and there was already last name, but now you have the option, if you've selected last name, to click this to include first initial validation, which would require the guest to validate their first initial when pulling up their reservation on the kiosk. If you have contracted ID scanning, you'll also have the option to use Scan ID for primary authentication. Previously, Scan ID was an option listed here, but it was called Scan ID to find reservations. So this has been relocated and renamed. And you do have the ability to select all, some, or none of these. And if you select all three, they will appear as authentication fields on the kiosk itself. Next, I have a pretty cool feature that is in pilot right now, meaning that it's not ready for prime time and not available to everyone yet. So we're going to give you a preview of it. And if you're interested in this feature, you can reach out to the support team and request that you would like the feature enabled, and they will let you know when we are able to enable it for your hotel. But it's very exciting and again, heavily requested. It's the ability to import a group rooming list via CSV. So I've made a test group here called Julia's group, and I have rooms blocked here. And when I go to the rooming list section, you'll see I now have a purple button that says import next to the plus sign where I previously would go to add reservations. You can still add reservations the normal way or the old way, but now you have the ability to use the CSV import. Really important to note here is that there's a template. So if you come to the knowledge base article for this, this feature, or go to the feature release notes for this release, you'll see at the bottom there is a group rooming list template.csv file. If you click that and download it, this is the perfect template for you to sort of put the information in and upload it into the system. It's formatted correctly, and it also gives you some heads up on instructions in here. So this is what a blank one looks like. You can see the first name, there's a column for first name, last name, arrival date, and departure date. room type, occupancy, email, and phone. Some notes on this is that you don't want to change the header titles. The order doesn't matter, but you want this to say arrival space date, not arrival, for example. And then the format for your arrival and departure date should be the same as your hotel. So if you are set up to have, month / day / year, that's how you'd want it to appear here. Or if yours is different, you'd want it to appear as it appears in your hotel. In the room type section, you want to make sure you write out the full room type name as it shows in the PMS. So if the room type name is Standard King, you would, with a space in between Standard King, you would type Standard space King, not the room type code, for example, like SK or K. You need to save the file as a CSV, not as an Excel workbook. And then you can import it into the PMS via the rooming list import tool. I went ahead and put some data in here. I'm going to delete these instructions because those aren't part of the import. And I'm going to save it. You can see here I've got an email, phone number. I also should mention the occupancy column is related to how many people should be in the room. So that's a single number, 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. And then the email column does matter. It needs to be in the proper format. So if it's not, text at text.either.com or edu or something that's valid. If it's not valid, the import tool will reject that reservation. So the email does need to be in the correct valid email format. The phone number does not, though. The phone number can be in whatever format makes sense for you. So
quick note, I want to chime in. Email and phone aren't required fields. Everything else is, but if you leave them blank, that's fine.
Yeah, thank you, Erin. That's a really good point. So I've put this here. I'm going to import it into my group. So I select import, and then my file was this one. So I'm going to open it. And then I get a preview here of the reservations I'm importing. It shows me how the names are appearing, the arrival and departure dates, the room type that it pulled through, and then the occupancy based on that first or second. And then as Erin mentioned, the email and phone number fields aren't required, and those can be seen over here if you toggle over to guest info. You can see those here. Again, they can be blank. If anything, if the system was confused when it imported anything, it will be red. It looks like my file was in pretty good shape, but for example, if it didn't recognize the room type, it would be red, and it would sort of prompt you to select the correct one. So now that I've got these in here and I've confirmed I'm happy with how they're appearing and that the data is correct, I can hit create reservations, and that's going to lock my rooming list while it is importing the reservations. Once it's done, it will let me know. I've got this refresh button on the right-hand side too. While we're waiting for that, it's a CSV file as a note, and this is all in the feature release notes and in the notes for this feature, but the CSV needs to use commas as separators, not semicolons. That's an important note about the file too. But if you are using our template, it is set to that by default. So if we now unlock the rooming list because it's done, we can see all of those imported successfully, and we were able to use this new feature. If any of them didn't import successfully, it would say import failed, which I can show you on this here, what that looks like. So I would have gotten, if any of them didn't work, it would have said import failed. And then I could look at the reservations that did not import correctly, and I could try to import them again or update the information so that's correct and try again. And then lastly is that country-specific requirement that Erin mentioned on the For France, the pro forma invoice now has a sequence number that's been added to the print and email versions of the individual or group pro forma invoice. Those are also noted in the activity log. This is not enabled by default, and you need to contact customer support for that feature. But if you do, that will then be an option listed under your pro forma section. And with that, I think I've covered everything.
All right, thank you, Julia. I'd now like to turn over the floor for questions. Remember, you can submit questions through the question box in the middle of the control panel. So I don't see any questions yet, but I'll give everyone a few minutes to enter those. All right, I'm still not seeing any questions, so I'll switch back to my screen. So in this webinar, we explained how to generate the comparison to budget report, illustrated that when the rounding dropdown displays when a value is entered for a based on rate, demonstrated that filters and search parameters remain applied when clicking into and back from accounts receivables, commissions, company and TA cards, accounts, and the reports inbox. We showed that totals and a reason filter have been added to the rooms out of order and out of service report. Explained updates to the type email in subtag for Stayntouch Guest Kiosk. Showed how to customize primary authentication for check-in via Stayntouch Guest Kiosk. Illustrated the addition of the group rooming list CSV import. And finally, we showed that the Performa invoice sequence number was added to the print and email versions of the individual and group Performa invoice and the activity log. With that, I'd like to conclude our presentation. Thank you all for coming, and if you have any additional questions, feel free to email me at erin.fisher@stayntouch.com. Thanks again.